Good afternoon, folks. This is your ticker guy, Carl, coming at you from sunny Niceville, Florida. I wanted to update and expand on my appearance on Larry Kudlow's show last night. Specifically, I wanted to address a couple of things. Mr. Smead and Mr. Boyer made some statements that I did not believe were correct. And Mr. Smead in particular had me smirking rather violently on the screen while he was talking. If you were watching my facial expressions, I'm sure you saw it. There was a reason for that, and that's that he was spouting off some things that implied a change in consumer credit behavior that just didn't happen. And I don't know if Mr. Smead knew this or if he was just talking out his hat in an attempt to make a point that couldn't be defended. But whichever it was, it needs to be brought up and it needs to be cleared, because it's extremely important that we understand what sort of recession we're in and how we got here. Specifically, the comment that Mr. Smead made that raised my rankles was that no one was borrowing in November and December of last year. The implication that was left from this is that it was just November and December of last year, that things went back to normal after that. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. In November, consumer credit expanded at a negative 4.2% rate. That is, it decreased to a negative 4.2% rate. These are all annualized. 3.5% negative in December. In January, consumer credit expanded at a 0.8% annualized rate, and that is not to be unexpected. In other words, folks, you see consumer credit expand in January for a very simple reason. That is when your credit card bill comes in, and therefore the totals are tabulated up for this thing that we do every year called Christmas. However, that does not make a trend change, nor did it mark one in this particular case. And it is most important that we look at trends, not things that are ephemeral and come and go, blow away like the wind. You see, in February, consumer credit expanded at a negative 5.1% rate. In March, it was down 7.8%, and in April, it was down 7.4%. The important thing to keep in mind here, folks, is that the local top, that is the maximum consumer credit outstanding for both revolving, that is credit cards, and non-revolving, that is things like auto loans, occurred in January of 2009 at $2.570 billion. Okay, and remember that number, $2.570 billion. The total for credit cards topped out at $961 billion. With the total non-financial, this is consumer credit only, okay, so this is what you and I carry, topped out at $2.570 billion. The most current release for July shows a negative 1.5% expansion, that is to say a 1.5% contraction, in the month of May. Now, you say, well, why May? Maybe that's a trend change. No, folks. The month of May is when April's purchases are recorded. And what happens in April? April is the day that we file all of our taxes, and most people get a very sizable refund. They then get kind of flush and go out and spend some money on their credit cards. Not a surprise. Now, a lot of people don't actually get their refund in April, but they know what it is, and that's the most important thing in terms of consumer behavior. You know that you're going to get a big check back, so you go out and you blow some money. All right. The important thing here, guys, is that when we take a look at the total financial number, the total amount, we find that it is down about $60 billion. It's at $2.519 trillion as of May. So the $60 billion quote that I put up was correct. However, I do wish to revise and correct the record in that $60 billion off of $2.519 billion, or actually off of the top at about 2.57. While it is $60 billion, it's not 6%, it's about 2.5%. So it's actually worse than I had quoted. I was being a little too optimistic. I have a habit of doing that. I try not to be Mr. Doom and Gloom. If I'm going to be off, I tend to be off on the optimistic side. Unfortunately, the facts are a little more glum than that. The other thing that you need to keep in mind here is that we have not cut much at all in the way of credit card debt. In fact, only about half of that consumer debt has come off of credit cards. In the fourth quarter, the final number after revisions for the fourth quarter was $960 billion. Is now $928. An awful lot of that, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, has come from charge-offs. That is debt that is never, ever going to be collected. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a credit-led recession. Mr. Smead can make all the assertions that he wants, that it's not, and he can make all the assertions that he wants that consumers were still borrowing in the first half of the year. The data doesn't support the assertion. The fact of the matter is that we didn't stop charging up our credit cards and start paying things down until January, which is exactly what I said on Mr. Kudlow's show, that it was just a few months ago that the top came in consumer credit, and it's still contracting. We are not done deleveraging the consumer balance sheet, and if you believe that we are, let me ask you this. This recession and this economic crisis began with people being unable to pay their subprime mortgages. It did not start with unemployment that led to delinquencies. That is, unemployment did not go up dramatically, leading with people laid off, they cannot pay their bills, that then led to mortgage delinquencies and led to credit card delinquencies. No, it went the other way. It started with people unable to pay their mortgages, which then in turn led to a contraction in economic activity, which led to layoffs, which led to yet more contraction in economic activity. If you get this wrong, everything else that you believe and do with regards to where the economy is going and where our government policies are aimed is going to be backwards. Let me point something else out. If you have too much credit in the system, you cannot borrow your way out of the system, nor can you tax and spend your way out. Ladies and gentlemen, please understand something. Every dollar that the federal government spends is in fact borrowed, either short-term through taxes or long-term through asset sales and debt sales. Well, not asset sales, debt sales, treasury bond sales to be specific. All of those are in fact borrowings. If it's out of tax receipts, it's short-term borrowing and that you pay your taxes and it's paid back. If it is a treasury bond sale, it is in many cases a longer-term debt sale, although not always. Some of the debt sales the Treasury does are a very short period. But in point of fact, the government doesn't manufacture, or that is, create anything. So the idea that the government can spend its way out of a credit-led recession is exactly backwards. The government can spend its way out of an inventory-led recession, provided that the fundamental underlying problem that got you there is not an overexpansion of credit. If it is, then what the federal government does when it tries to spend its way out of the recession is backwards. And that's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. We've been trying to deal with this in that sort of a fashion, and we're doing the wrong thing because the diagnosis is incorrect. This is a major issue, because while you may seem to have gotten better if you're a drunk by taking another drink, the fact of the matter is all you've done is make the hangover worse. So we are now in this process of having the Federal Reserve and the federal government crank up debt production themselves to take over from the fact that consumers and businesses are withdrawing very rapidly from taking on more debt. But the federal government is taking on debt at a prodigious rate, far faster than we were. To put this in perspective, in 2004, the consumer had, in regular consumer credit, revolving and non-revolving, $2.191 trillion worth of credit outstanding. In 2008, it was 2.562. That's not a huge increase, okay? That's about 2.2 trillion to about 2.56 trillion. What, $450 billion? How much has the federal government blown in the last year? How much have they blown in the last 6 months? How much have they blown since September and October? $2 trillion plus? See, this is the problem. We're trying to create a situation here where the economy will begin to grow again. But the error was in the diagnosis. We're not going to solve the problem that way, ladies and gentlemen. And it's most important that everybody understand that this is in fact what is going on. More in a moment.